What is up with the spy balloon? What is going on there? We have one that was like not maybe a Chinese spy balloon, but it was a little hobby group that sent something up perhaps that got shot down, and one that was a Chinese balloon that went across the whole country, and then maybe another one possibly that got shot down before. But what's the deal with those? Have those always been coming over, or what? Or is that something that's brand new?
No, it's relatively new. Now, there are balloons all over the place for weather, for science, for whatever else. The balloon in question that the U.S. shot down over the Carolina seabed was definitely a spy balloon. So let me just kind of dial back and give you an idea of how this happened on the Chinese side, because it really is happening. So Chairman Xi has now consolidated more power unto his person than any human in history. And as part of that purge, he has removed everyone from any position of decision-making within the Chinese system who is competent. And so it really is a one-man show. I mean, we can look at Russia and talk about he really only has half a dozen advisors anymore. And we can talk about Obama and how he locked himself into the White House. But Xi has no one. No one will bring him any information because they don't know how he will react. And he often reacts violently. And that's, shooting the messenger is not good for information flow. In this sort of environment, China has made a series of catastrophic mistakes over the course of the last couple of years. Wolf warrior diplomacy destroyed his relations with most of the world, because now they're literally proud of their genocides in China now, and that does not resonate with anyone. We've got relations with the United States, which are their security guarantor for their trade and their primary consumer base, and the country that allows them to import all their food and their energy that's just cheesed off at them completely. And they're even ruining relations with the Europeans over the Ukraine war. So one way or another, it has finally percolated up to Xi of just how deep in the shit they really are. So he sends out these peace feelers saying that, okay, we won't be quite so crazy. And Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, was on his way to the airport to get on a plane to come to China. But because there's no information exchange within the Chinese system at all, and their intelligence operation said, hey, I got an idea. Because we're in a cult of personality and the great leader hates all things United States, I am going to float a 350-foot across balloon over the United States that you don't even need binoculars to see. And I'm going to dangle a chunk of apparatus that's as big as an Embraer jet. Now, if you've ever been to a regional airport, you know those well. They're the ones with two seats on one side and one on the other.
Okay.
They're very, very small. They're very, very cramped, unless you're dangling it from a balloon.
Okay.
And then it's going to spend 7 days going across the United States. We're not going to get any intelligence from this, because the thing is, I'm going to send it over the missile bases. I don't know if you knew this, but unless you're actually launching the nukes, the missile silos are closed. And so there's no information that could be gathered from a balloon that you can get from a satellite. Even better, the Americans are going to have a U-2 jet above it and a spy helicopter below it all 7 days with whisper sensors recording every bit of transmission it does, looking at what it does, learning the architecture. It will be the intelligence coup of the decade for the Americans. And at the end of the day, they're going to shoot it down and get the hardware too. So they're going to get the codes and the sequencing and the routing information, all of it. It is arguably the dumbest thing that I have seen any country do in the last 20 years. And the Chinese government, for the most part, didn't even know what was happening. Their Defense Department didn't know, their foreign ministry didn't know. It's pretty obvious from the calls that Xi didn't know. It was just some idiot in the intelligence services. That is the degree of decision-making breakdown we are seeing in China today, that someone would think that this is a good idea and then not be able to stop because the information exchange up and down the system is now so destroyed that you can't even have a basic conversation.
Do you think that person, it's off with their head right now? That
I'm sure. If they're not dead already, they wish they were.
So who has to knock on that door and go in and be like, sir, we just lost a spy balloon over.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Who's that guy?
Do you want to be that guy? Yeah.
God, is there something similar to the Russian Security Council, where they have the semi-newly appointed deputy chairman, and then the chairman, which is the president of Russia, and then heads of intelligence agencies, and then it kind of filters down to some regional district representatives and other people in the government?
Is the problem is Xi spent his first 5 years purging the country of all of his political opponents. And then he spent his next 5 years purging the country of all theoretical opponents, which meant anyone who could think. There's nobody left. So yes, those institutions do exist to a degree, but they're either staffed by people who are utterly incompetent or patsies who got their job because of their personal loyalty. Even in Russia, which is not what we would call an information-free society, there are still a handful of people at the top that will talk to Putin and tell him uncomfortable truths. Now, 3 of them are competent. 3 of them are not.
Interesting.
So he is getting a steady a steady stream of misinformation and propaganda. But there are three people who will tell him the truth. Xi has nothing like that.
Because we think of things from our perspective, we think of, okay, what are our top geopolitical issues of the day? Is it China? Is it Russia? Energy? Whatever it might be for us. Do they have a list like that, do you think, that they look at and they're thinking like, okay, we have Taiwan, we have maybe some chips and semiconductor type infrastructure out there that we might want, that might help us if we had it. What do we have as far as mining goes? And they look at those sorts of things?
So if you want to go back a little bit, if you remember Deng Xiaoping, he was the second generation leader, the guy after Mao. He was probably the best leader that China has ever had because he realized what the strengths and the weaknesses of the Chinese system were, and he worked assiduously internationally to address the weaknesses and leverage the strengths. So he is the guy who met with Nixon and was brought into the American post-World War II, Cold War, international globalization structures. And that set the stage for the industrial expansion to create the China that we now know. And he wanted to make sure that they never had a repeat of Mao. So he personally selected not just his successor, but the following guy too. And that's Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. Between the two of them, they ruled China for 20 years, and that has been the golden age of China. But he knew that he was not smart enough to figure out who should run the country 30 years on. And so he left it to those two factions to come up with a compromise candidate. And the compromise candidate was Xi Jinping. Unfortunately for Jiang and Hu, Xi spent his first 5 years outmaneuvering them and gutting both factions. And then the second 5-year period, getting rid of anyone who might theoretically form a new faction. And so if you remember when he crowned himself president for life about a year ago, Hu Jintao was up on one of the desks on stage when it all went on, and they publicly escorted him out to underscore to the country just how there was no opposing power center anywhere, even theoretically in China anymore. It's just Xi.
And what is one child policy? When did that come into effect, and did they not project forward off what that was gonna do to them, or were they just looking at a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, and now they're at the 40, 50-year side of this? And what's going on there?
So the one-child policy was adopted about 40 years ago, and Mao was concerned that this up-and-coming Korea post-Japan occupation generation was going to expand so quickly that it was going to literally eat the country alive. And it has contributed now to the terminal demographic decline that China is in. But I don't think it's quite accurate, maybe a little unfair to put all of the fault on the one-child policy. It was, in time, proven to be a bad policy. I'm not disputing that. But when you move off the farm and into the town, you go from kids being free labor, and so you have as many as you can put up with, plus one, because that's how you find out it's too many, to kids being a luxury good and just the source of migraines. You know, if you go back just to the 1950s, they were having 7 and 8 kids per woman. Now in the cities, it's less than 1. And obviously the one-child policy played a role in that, but just the urbanization process overall greatly depresses birth rates. And now we've got China, which is the fastest urbanizing country in history, did it in 40 years.